Hello everybody and welcome to my channel Plants and Paints. My name's Zahir and today we're going to be talking about the Maranta Leuconeura. Most of you know that I had actually said that I was going to do a video on this last week due to the fact that we had a poll for which plant you would like to learn about the most, and this drew with last week's plant. So I did say that, I promised to make a video on this plant during this week. Unfortunately, I had such a busy week at work, so it's had to be put forward to the weekend, but here we are today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the prayer plant, the Maranta Leuconeura, also known as the herringbone plant, and it's a plant from the family of the Marantaceae, also the family of the arrowroots plant. So we're going to get into a little bit of a description of it. First of all, starting off with my personal opinion about the plant. So the Maranta fascinator, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most strikingly beautiful plants within the plant kingdom itself, with its beautiful light green markings in the middle of the leaves and dark green velvety leaves with the red arching herringbone pattern of the veins going down the leaves. Although this plant is quite a popular plant within the plant industry, it can be a little bit tricky to come across sometimes. When I first started collecting plants myself, I got quite into the prayer plants, and this was one of the first ones that I saw. I actually saw this on Tropical Plant Addict's videos, and big shout out to Tropical Plant Addict. She's been very inspirational to me collecting plants and actually getting a plant collection going, and now actually making videos about the plants that I keep. This was in one of her videos, and I started off by asking a few questions about where I could find one, and how much I liked seeing her one in her video. So a mature Maranta, the leaves on it can actually get to about 6 inches in length, and rising from a short stem in the center, this plant grows outwards and generally droops down. So it can be used like a hanging plant, so you can put it in a hanging basket above your window, depending on what facing window you have, so direction of sun facing into your window, because these plants can be a little bit fussy and a little bit tricky. Because of the trickiness of them, they can generally not be quite a easy house plant to keep happy, and you have to get them quite right as far as taking care of them and taking care of their needs. So I'm quite lucky because a lot of the plants that I keep don't like a lot of direct sunlight, and this happens to be one of those plants. If you put it in direct sun, then it can actually get browning of the leaves, and if you're not careful, it can actually end up killing the plant if you don't remedy that pretty quickly. So I keep mine in a north facing window, and my north facing window, I don't know if you can see from the reflection in my door, but I've actually got a balcony outside as well. So even though I'm in a north facing window, my balcony actually provides an extra bit of shade coming into my house as well. So it is quite dappled light that comes in, and I do keep this in the window quite near my door, and as you can see, it is flourishing quite well, and it is doing really nicely at the moment. So direct sunlight can scorch the leaves of the prayer plant, which if not remedied can quickly kill your plant. So make sure not to put it in any direct sunlight. Now we'll go on to watering a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about watering your plant. So when watering the plant, generally you should be using filtered water or rainwater, or you can even use distilled water. Now myself, as I mentioned in my previous video, I use filtered water for all of my plants. Keeping that in mind, even though I do filter my water, I will still leave it out for a further 24 hours before I actually use it for any of my plants, just to make sure that if there are um, any bad elements left in the water that can naturally evaporate from there, I've given them the opportunity to do that. So try and, you know, replicate that as much as possible. As you can see, my plant doesn't really have any browning tips or, you know, anything to show it's in any bad kind of health. And I think a lot of the reason that that is due to the fact that I keep it very well watered. As in, I watch how much water is in the plant. I water it specifically with filtered water. You know, I won't put tap water in to any of my plants. Now, if you're not able to use filtered water, then, and you don't have a filter at home and you can't collect rainwater and you don't have any distilled water and you're still going to water your plants, then, you know, do try and leave that water out for 24 hours just to make sure that any of the bad elements that are in the water have a chance to naturally leach out of there. And also it gives the water a chance to get up to room temperature. Now, if you're not going to do that and you're quite impatient, or your plant needs to be watered and you don't have that available and it's in dire need of water, then at least try and make sure that the water is at least slightly warm. Any cold water will actually damage your plant, the root system in the plant, and can quite easily send your plant into shock. Now, as far as the soil goes for this plant, you can use a general potting soil for it, but you need to make sure that it's well draining. Now, if you find that the soil isn't very well draining, then what you can do is you can add perlite to the mix or a coarse sand, and that should give it a reasonably good drainage quality. Furthermore to that, you can actually go ahead and make your own soil mix. And what you can do to create your own soil mix is use 1 part perlite or coarse sand. You can use a good quality houseplant potting mix. You can use 1 part peat, and if you have it, you can stick a pinch of lime dust in there. They actually respond, the prayer plants actually respond really well to a pinch of lime dust. I have put it in a few of my plants, and this happens to be one of them, and as you can see, is very, very happy. I can't notice any faults with this, and you know, he's quite full and quite bushy, and I'm considering that I might stick that pinch of lime dust into the rest of my prayer plants as well. It seems as the ones that I've put it in seem to be doing so well. Another thing you can do to add to the drainage of the soil mix that you create is you can put some rocks in the bottom of the pot that you're using. So either rocks or some aggregates, you know, little pebbles of some sort, and just making sure that you're not blocking the drainage hole at the bottom, and that will give you an extra layer of drainage within the pot itself, because these plants, they don't like to be overly moist, although they do not like to be dry. So do not let your Maranta dry out. Keep it evenly moist pretty much all of the time, to be honest, but don't overwater it. Don't let the soil become soggy. Now, if for instance you're using a general potting mix, and or you've bought the plant and it came in a general potting mix, and the plant seems a bit unhappy, but you can't notice any actual defects with the plant itself, it might be due to the fact that the soil itself is holding too much moisture. So I've found when I've brought plants, let's say from garden centres, in particularly garden centres, because they love to just water the plants, and you know, with such an array of plants in the garden centre, it's hard for any individual to know the care needs of every single plant in there. So they will just go and fill all the pots with water, unfortunately. And I brought a few home and I've noticed that they are actually overwatered. So I found a nifty little trick when it comes to that myself, where I'll take the plant out of the pot, I will put some newspaper down on my counter, and I will try and remove the plant with as much of the soil from the pot as possible. So I'll squash the pot a little bit on the sides just to compress the soil in, and then I will remove the plant and put it on top of the newspaper, and then I'll wrap the newspaper pretty tightly around the soil, and I will leave that, either for the whole day or overnight if it's towards the evening, and then the following morning I will remove the newspaper, and it will have actually drained out most of the moisture from the plant. So at that stage you'll be pretty happy to put it back into the pot, knowing that there's not excessive moisture in there, and the plant should become happy again after that. Now, fertilizers. You should be fertilizing this plant during summer all the way through to autumn. Now, as a rule of thumb for myself, when it comes to fertilizing my plants, I will use about a quarter strength of what they actually recommend on the bottles, just to make sure I'm not putting too much fertilizer in there. And fertilizers have a habit of hanging around in your soil and not getting taken up 100% by the plant. So less is often more. I'm sure everybody's heard that saying before, and I've had no ill effects over my years of keeping plants. Although I've recently started collecting these kind of plants, I've generally had plants around me pretty much all of my life. Either it's been something that's been brought onto me by my grandparents or my parents. I pretty much have grown up with plants in my house, and they've always shown some sort of keen interest. So a good quarter water soluble fertilizer for your plant will be good. A balanced fertilizer, and just watering with the fertilizer on average once every 2 weeks. Now, if your plant is needing to be watered every 2 weeks, then you might want to use this once a month. But if your plant needs watering every 2 weeks, then every week, then every second watering you'll use fertilizer. It also gives you an opportunity to make sure that any extra fertilizer is being diluted into that second watering where you're not using the fertilizer, so that the plant gets to take it up as much as possible without it having to build up in the soil. Repotting. Now, these plants generally, they don't mind being root bound. They're not particularly fussy about that, although it does have an adverse effect. Now, what will actually happen if your Maranta becomes root bound is the growth rate. You'll become familiar with how quickly it's growing and how many leaves it's producing within a certain amount of time. And if it becomes root bound, you'll pretty much be able to tell that by the fact that its growth rate has slowed down. Now, obviously, base that during the growing season. Don't base that over a winter period, for instance, because naturally during a winter period this plant is going to slow its growth rate down anyway. So, and really and truly, you don't want to be repotting your plants during the winter anyway. You want to be doing that during spring, summer, early autumn. So if it needs repotting and you notice that the growth rate has slowed down quite significantly, then what you want to do is you want to get a pot that is 1 to 2 inches bigger. You don't want to go any bigger than that, because too much room for the plant roots to be moving will actually send your plant into shock, and what will actually happen is the leaves themselves will start curling up, and that's the plant showing you that it's actually in shock and that it doesn't like the new environment that you've put it into. So do try, if you are, or you do find a reason why you need to repot your plant, to try and keep it 1 to 2 inches at most bigger than the pot that it currently is growing in. And if you are repotting, make sure that you're repotting due to the fact that it's root bound. If it's not root bound, then this plant doesn't actually need to be repotted. We're going to talk a little bit about pruning and taking cuttings off the plant. So if you notice your plant is quite leggy but doesn't have a lot of growth in the middle, so the middle area is quite empty and you want to fill out the space a bit more, and it's looking a bit sparse in between the leaves. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to find a node. So if I actually show you this node here, so let me actually bring that a bit closer for you. So this node here, what you're actually going to do is you're going to cut above the node. So you're going to go above the node and cut here. In fact, let me pick a different one because that one's got quite a few leaves on it, just make it easier for you to see. So this node here, what you're going to do is you're going to actually cut about 1 centimeter or 2 above the node. Now when you're cutting above the node, what that's actually doing is it's going to encourage more leaves to grow from just underneath where you've made the cutting. So where you've actually cut one leaf off, in return you'll actually get 2 or 3 new stems actually growing out of that location. So if you do find that your plant's looking a bit sparse and a bit leggy and there's not as much growth on it as you would like, and it's not looking as full as you would like, then just cut it above one of the nodes, a couple of centimeters above it, and that will promote a lot of new growth for the plant. Now obviously after taking a cutting, oh sorry, I forgot to mention something very important. You want to make sure you're using a sterilized gardening scissors. Don't just cut them with any old scissors, because the last thing you want to do is give a disease to the plant or make it ill and send the plant into shock due to the fact that it's taken in some contaminants that it really is not used to having. So again, just take a cutting a couple of centimeters above a node, and that will promote lots of new growth for you. So where you've taken one off, you might be lucky and get 3 new leaves grow out there. 2 or 3 new leaves is quite normal, and that will fill your plant up a lot and make it look a lot bushier for you. Now at the same time, you can take cuttings. So if your plant isn't leggy and there are gaps in there and you just want to fill those gaps in a bit, or you just want to generally take some cuttings, maybe you want to give some to friends or family, or some people have liked the plant and you want to hand some cuttings out as a gift, or root some cuttings and send them out as potted plants, then what you actually do is you cut just below the node. So you go same again but in the opposite direction. You go 2, maybe 3 centimeters below the node. You take the cutting using your sterilized plant scissors, and then you take that cutting and put it in your filtered water. So I generally will use a glass, and I'll put the cuttings in the same condition that I keep the plants in, because any change in light or humidity or anything like that will generally aid to the cutting taking longer or not actually even rooting. So just keep the environment the same as the plant's been living in. So generally, if I was taking a cutting off of this, I would try and put the cuttings near the plant as much as possible, so that the environment in every particular way stays the same as much as possible. Now those cuttings may take 2 to 3, well even 3 to 4 weeks to root. Once you've established a healthy root system on those cuttings, you can take those cuttings and put them into the soil, so filling up your gaps within your plant. Now alternatively, you can actually take those cuttings and you can put them straight into the container that you want them to go into. So if you're filling up a gap, they can go straight into the container where your plant's already growing, or if you're creating a new plant, then they can go straight into that container. Same thing again, it will take 3 to 4 weeks to root. Once they've rooted, you should start seeing some new growth popping up. Once you start seeing that, you'll know that that plant's taken into the soil well, and it will start growing. Alternatively, if you want to just give it a healthy start and a bit of a boost when you take that cutting, you can use the rooting hormones. Now I've used them before, and particularly I can't tell too much of a difference myself, to be honest. I mean, I get equally good results with cuttings without root hormone as I do with root hormone. So when I'm taking a cutting, generally I won't pull the rooting hormone out of the cupboard and use that to add to the plant to give it some assistance with rooting, because the plant naturally is used to rooting itself in that sort of situation. Most of the plants that you get have actually come from an environment where, you know, they've been grown within nurseries or stuff like that. So eventually they would have probably started out as a cutting of some sort anyway. So you don't have to particularly worry too much about that. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about pests. I'm going to show you my other Maranta while I'm at it. I've got the more standard version of the Maranta, and we'll talk a little bit about pests while I just show you a bit of this. I've not had this for quite as long as I've had the other one, so obviously the growth isn't quite as much as my tricolor or fascinator, but this one is doing very well as well. I'm very happy with it. So pests. Now generally with the Maranta you can find that most of the common pests that you can find on houseplants will actually affect these plants, but the most common one is the one I'm going to talk about today. So most commonly these plants will be affected by spider mites. Now, as there is a bit of a plus side to that, I suppose, because these plants, they love to be in high humidity. So providing you're keeping them in a high humid environment, then spider mites will struggle to survive and they won't be able to thrive within that environment, because spider mites actually hate to be in a humid environment. So if you do find you have spider mites, then, you know, obviously if you've got a humidifier in your house, make sure you're running your humidifier quite close in relation to the plant, and make sure that you're misting your plant on a regular basis. My cat's just come to say hello to me. Yeah, make sure you're misting your plants on a regular basis, and the high humidity around the plant should keep the spider mites at bay, and generally you shouldn't have too much of a problem with them if you do find that they are there. Like I said, just keep your humidity high and make sure you're misting the plants on a regular basis, because spider mites absolutely hate that and they will not be able to survive for long within that environment. So just keep that in mind. Also, to help while you're treating your plants in the natural way by using humidity and spraying the plants, you can also use neem oil, because spider mites don't like neem oil either. So you can get like makeup removing pads. My wife's got them, so I might nick a few off of her every now and then. Cover them in neem oil and then just wipe the plant over with the neem oil off the cotton pads, and that is something that the spiders don't like either. It will actually kill them and it will repel them from the plant. Now we're going to talk a little bit about disease as well. Now when it comes to disease, I'm not overly spectacular at remembering how to pronounce the name, so I'm going to read this name off of a piece of paper. I wrote it down beforehand just to make sure I don't butcher it for you. So if you notice that your plant has water soaked spots on it, so the Maranta's got little spots that are very moist, and if you rub them, then you can actually rub away that part of the leaf. Now if you notice that, then it's almost certainly going to be, now wait for it, here we go, Helminthosporium. So Helminthosporium leaf spot. Now this can definitely kill your plant if it's not controlled. It's one of the more common diseases that you're actually going to get on a Maranta plant. So it's quite easy to remedy that, because that generally is connected to overwatering or too much moisture around or within your plant. So if you do notice that you're getting little spots on the leaves that are very moist and it seems to be eating away at the leaf itself, then what you actually want to do is cut down your watering and make sure that you're not leaving the plant too wet when you're misting the plant. Now in descriptions of how to mist your plant, you'll quite often read it says give them a light misting, and you know that is pretty true to the point that when you're misting your plants, you know, get a mister and mist them more lightly. You know, some plants may like being misted on a daily basis, some plants may like being misted a few times a week, but mist them lightly enough so that by the time the morning sun has got to the plants for maybe an hour or so, that morning mist has actually had a chance to dry up and it's not stayed on the plant throughout the day, because what you're replicating is the morning dew. So the morning dew that settles on the grass, you know, and on the leaves of plants, you're just replicating that. And that don't generally, if you're up in the morning and you're out and about by 10 o'clock, usually that's gone. So try and replicate it to behave in that manner as much as possible. So stop over watering. Cut down your misting on your plant. If you find that the soil of the plant is too moist, then going back to what I said earlier, remove the plant from the pot, wrap the soil and the plant around the base in newspaper, leave that to soak out as much of that moisture as possible. If you find that your soil is not draining very well, which can be another cause of this, then take a little bit of that soil away, mix some perlite or some coarse sand into your soil and then put it back into the pot to help with drainage. Also maybe put some rocks or pebbles in the bottom of the pot to help with drainage also. And again, use neem oil, because any diseases, neem oil is very good to help cure those diseases for you without having to put chemicals into the plant. Neem oil is actually a good all-round sort of treatment when it comes to plants and, you know, their diseases, and being able to treat them without putting harsh chemicals onto them or into their soil. Now, I think I've pretty much covered everything when it comes to the Maranta. If I haven't, or there's any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'm very happy to answer any questions. You know, I love an opportunity to hand out a little bit more knowledge, and because my videos are not cut or edited or anything like that, I just record them straight off the bat, and you know, you get whatever has come to my mind at that particular moment for the video. If I've missed something, please let me know. You know, the aim of my videos is to give you as much information as possible so that, you know, you have a general care guide for the kind of plants that you want to keep. And most of the videos I've made so far have been requests of people wanting to learn something about a particular type of plant, the Marantas today being exactly the same. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope you've enjoyed seeing my Marantas as well. As far as my plants are concerned, especially the Tricolor Fascinator, it is definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite plant. As I mentioned earlier, as far as I'm concerned in the plant kingdom, this has, you know, one of the most beautiful leaf patterns that I've ever seen on a plant, and I've got some